Welcome to part one of my 7-part series of breaking down the sales process. If you are just now finding this channel, my name is Dana Neeson. I run a telesales team for final expense insurance across 17 states. And my whole goal is to help you have more elevated and stronger sales conversations. Now, everything that I'm about to go over in these next 7 videos are in the previous 100 videos that you can find on my page and different parts, different videos. You can find it, you can search for it, but I'm going to break it down for you here. So it's very easy to find. It's very easy to go back to. And the most important part of the sales process, once you have permission to engage, because we're not going to be covering objection handling in the first 30 seconds, we're going to make some assumptions that you already have a customer on the phone and now it's game time and you need to give them all you got and help them feel comfortable to make a decision with you. And the first part of the sales process is discovery. Discovery will set the tone for the rest of your sales conversation. It will help you understand who your customer is. It will help you figure out why they're on the phone with you, what's motivating them, what's prevented them from getting something in the past. And ultimately, if there's something they can fall back on that would prevent them from getting a life insurance policy, as well as getting them to start thinking about the consequences of not doing anything at all. Now, the reason I'm not just going to do a screen share and show you my script and which lists all the discovery questions that my team asks is because even with my team, with the coaching process, I'm trying to get them to think about what it is we're trying to accomplish in the first part of our call, not necessarily focus on the questions on the script. Because when you do that, what tends to happen is you become way more focused on the next question you want to ask, and you stop listening to what your customer's response is. If we were to look at discovery from a 10,000-foot view, you should probably be writing this down. Here are the things I would want to know about my customer before I leave the discovery phase. Number 1, I want to know if they currently have any life insurance in place. And if they do, I want to know how long they've had it for, how much coverage it provides, and if they are wanting to increase the total amount of protection that they have for the family, or if they're looking to replace it. Okay, that's really important information. If they don't have any insurance at all, I would like to know if they've ever had it in the past. That's going to help set the tone for how I'm going to approach that person. If we're dealing with someone who doesn't have any life insurance right now and has never had it in the past, this is a perfect opportunity for you to take a step back and bring how their situation is making them feel to the surface. And that would sound something like this. Got it. I understand. So what I'm hearing is that you don't have any insurance in place right now, and you've also never had any before. So gosh, that whole process of trying to find something probably feels a little bit confusing and overwhelming. Okay, that's a very important strategy because you are now helping your customer identify how their situation is making them feel and what type of impact it might be having on them. And if you're the one that brings those feelings to the surface, they're going to start viewing you as the person who is going to be able to solve their problems. If they already have life insurance and they are looking to either replace or increase, doesn't matter, either situation is fine. You want to know why, where this is coming from. And if they're looking to increase, you want to find out how much coverage they currently have in place now. And you want to know how much more they're hoping to get and why they feel that the current amount of coverage they have in place might not be enough. All of those things are going to be very important in helping make strong recommendations, right, when we get to the end. And that's going to be in video 6 or 7, something like that. So once we've identified whether or not our customer currently doesn't have insurance and what they're looking to accomplish, we then want to take a step back and ask them about their search process. We want to know, how long have they been looking to solve this solution? Because that will also reveal maybe a pain point. If they say, well, I've been thinking about this on and off for a year or 6 months or 3 months, any sort of time frame that's greater than a couple of days should have big flashing light bulbs go off in your head. That is a big red flag. If somebody has been searching for what they want for longer than a month and have not made a decision to change their situation. So if you find out that someone's been looking for X amount of time, the next question you want to ask them is, oh, okay, what have you found? Get them to start telling you what they've seen out there. Then you want to know why they didn't make the decision to move forward. And 9 times out of 10, it's one of 2 reasons. It's either A, it's price, or B, they still are confused and they're afraid of making the wrong choice. But usually what you'll find is it comes down to price. So they might say something to you like, well, everything's just more expensive than I thought it was going to be. So in order for you to understand, again, how to give them proper recommendations at the end, you can't just let them tell you everything was more expensive than I thought it was going to be and move on to your next question. You need to peel that layer back even more and ask them what they mean by it's too expensive. What does too expensive mean to your customer? Because that is the only thing that matters. One of the reasons it is so important not to skip this part, because even agents on my team skip this part. And it is so important to not skip it and to not bring this part up later, because we're about to transition into asking some more emotional questions. And you need to get your customer in the habit, in the pattern of question asking and question answering. So when we get to more uncomfortable questions, they're already in the mindset of, I'm going to be answering some questions so this person can figure out how to help me. And I should probably state that before you even just start out spewing questions to your prospect, you need to ask permission, right? You need to ask permission. You can't just verify information and then just start asking questions. You need to prepare your customer that you're about to ask them some questions so that you can get a better understanding of what they might be looking for. And then you have to take the sale away by saying, just to make sure I can even help you in the first place. And then you ask permission. Would that be okay? And let your customer respond. Now the gate is open. You have permission to start asking more of just your general situation questions, which is about whether or not they have life insurance and peeling those layers on their answers. Now that we know whether or not they've had it or they currently have it, we want to start getting an idea of what they're hoping this policy will cover, what it will take care of. And just because you sell final expense insurance, or just because you sell mortgage protection, or just because you sell term insurance, I don't care what type of insurance you sell, you cannot make the assumption that the reason your customer is on the phone with you is for what you have to offer. Or let's pretend you offer all sorts of insurance. It is still your job to get those answers from your customer and not give them multiple choice answers to make it easier for them to pick. What do I mean by multiple choice answers? Well, it would be, so are you looking to take care of a funeral or are you looking to pay for a mortgage, right? And if what do you do if they pick one? Oh yeah, I want to make sure my mortgage is taken care of. Okay, so then you move on to your next question. But I guarantee you, there's always more behind just the surface level answer. So if you make the mistake of just delivering multiple choice answers on a silver platter to your customer, they will choose one and not expand. So instead of giving them answers, I want you to ask open-ended questions. What expenses are you mostly concerned about your family having to pay for if something happens to you and you do pass away? And then you button it. So they're going to tell you what they want to pay for. Now we're selling final expense insurance, so we're hoping that their answer is funeral costs and final expenses, even if they say that, even if they give me the answer that I'm looking for, I don't stop there. I always ask them, is there any other expenses you're concerned about? And usually 80% of the time, there's always something else that they have to offer. So don't make the mistake of just getting the information you want to hear and moving on. Take that one step further and say, is there anything else you're concerned about? Same thing if they say, oh, I want to make sure my house is paid for if something were to happen to me and I pass away. Okay, I hear that. Is there anything else? Are there any other expenses you're concerned about? Try to get the bigger picture for your customer so they feel like you're actually here to help them, and so you can have a better understanding of your customer's needs. My team sells final expense insurance, so the direction that I'm going to take the rest of this discovery is going to be focused on the final expenses. But let's pretend for a second that you sell final expense insurance and the expenses that your customer is mostly concerned about taking care of has nothing to do with the funeral. Let's say they've already paid for their funeral and they're just looking to leave something behind. It is your job to ask your client what they mean by the funeral expenses are already taken care of. Does that mean they have a policy to take care of it? Does it mean that it's prepaid at the funeral home? If so, what part of the funeral is paid for? And will there be anything extra that they may not know about? For example, we have a lot of people who have plots paid for, but when we ask more questions, we come to find out that their family still might need to purchase a casket. And they didn't think about the transportation costs or the opening and closing of the plot or the headstone. Like, it's your job to be an expert in what goes into what you sell. So if you sell final expense insurance, you better be an expert on every single expense that goes into a cremation and every single expense that goes into a traditional burial, as well as some of the ones we're getting lately, like a green burial, or if someone tries to make jokes about, I'm just going to have my kids throw me out in the backyard, you have to be confident enough to say, well, I'm sure it's, feels good to joke about that, but I think that's illegal and we don't want your kids getting arrested, right? We have to change their mindset. And when we do that, it also positions ourselves as the expert. We're transitioning from situational questions to what expenses do we need to take care of, to we're hoping that we're talking about funeral and final expenses. And so we are going to ask questions in regards to the funeral. We want to find out who's going to be in charge of that, right? And sometimes we paint a picture of who in your family will be responsible for making that call, going down to the funeral home, meeting with the funeral director, and having to pay for all the costs associated with your funeral, right? It's not just who's your beneficiary. Very, very different. Same with cremation. So we're going to find out who it is. And I will let you in on a little pet peeve of mine, that if you find out the beneficiary are the kids, or you find out the beneficiary is the spouse or the sister, and your very next question are asking what their names are, and then you take those names and you insert it into every single part of the rest of your conversation, that sounds inauthentic. So you need to make sure that you transition from using their kids to using the actual saying, so your kids, and not always saying their names. I have people do role plays with me all the time. And when they ask me what my kids' names are, and then they use those names over and over and over and over and over again, it gets old and it makes me not want to talk to them anymore. Okay, so we know who is going to be in charge of the final arrangements. We also want to know what their final wishes are. Do they want a cremation? Do they want a burial? Do they even know? Sometimes people get freaked out about it. They don't know. They don't want to think about it. And in that case, you have to make them feel comfortable and say, not a problem. We'll just talk about putting some sort of plan together to take care of your final expenses, regardless of what you decide, and focus on what you can afford. But sometimes people get put themselves into a box and they think that they have to do a burial plan, or they think they have to do a cremation plan. And that's not the case. You can make it broad. You have to let your customer lead you, and then you have to meet them halfway so your conversation is relevant to them. Don't force anybody to pick one so that your quotes can be stronger. You just need to turn it into a final expense plan based on what your customer can afford, period. Now we know a lot about our customer, and now we want to ask some more uncomfortable questions. Questions like, it sounds like you're really close to your kids, and from what I'm hearing is that you don't want your kids to have to come out of pocket and pay for these expenses if they didn't have to. Is that right? Customer will say yes. And now you need to feel comfortable to ask them why. And what's going on with your kids where you feel like they wouldn't be able to pay for it? Or what's going on with your kids to where you wouldn't want them to pay for it? Or, so your kids not having to pay for this, why is that so important to you? You have to find an iteration of why that doesn't make your customer get defensive, or doesn't make your customer say, well, isn't that obvious? The reason that you're getting that response is because the way that you're delivering the why question is causing that sales resistance to begin with. But why though? I hear that a lot, but why though? And you're almost challenging them in a negative way instead of challenging them in a caring way where you really want to know because you're trying to understand. And when you start feeling the flow of this discovery, your customers are going to sometimes take a step back and say, wow, no one's ever asked me these kind of questions before. That if you get in a call where your customer says that to you, you can pretty much assume that you've won, because you've already positioned yourself as somebody different, as somebody who wants to understand, as somebody who cares. You haven't said anything about who you are and what you do and how we can save the day. You're putting 100% of the focus on your customer. So what do I mean by you're saving what you do because you're not here to save the day? Well, when you find out early on that your customer is looking to take care of a funeral cost, a mistake would be, oh, that's great, because that's all we sell. We're actually the leader in final expense insurance. You've just taken yourself one step down. You're taking the focus off your customer and you're putting it on yourself. It is not your turn. Or your customer says, well, I'm looking to take care of this, but I'm on a fixed income and I don't even know if I can afford it. Do not say, well, our company specializes with seniors who are living on a fixed income, so I'm sure we can find you an affordable plan. No, again, you do not want to take the focus off your customer and put it on yourself. There is going to be plenty of time for you to bring that up. There's going to be plenty of opportunity for you to then come in and be the hero when it's appropriate, but not during discovery. 100% of your focus needs to be on your customer. Now, there's going to be things that you're going to get that I can't possibly script, teach, say in a video, but you're going to get people with strong personalities that are going to ask you questions out of the gate. What do you do with those people? They're going to say things like, is this term or whole life? Or is this one of those that has a waiting period? And the hero syndrome that I like to classify is you get so excited that you have the answer that you just want to address that right then and there. Anytime someone comes off really strong and asks a question that you know the answer to, there's a couple of exceptions, but in those two examples I gave you, your goal is to try to figure out what's behind that question. Mr. Prospect, that's a really great question. Is there a reason that you asked me that? Or, Mr. Customer, that is a really, really good question. Why do you ask? If you give your customer the space to explain why they asked that question in the first place, you're going to be more equipped on how to best respond so it serves your conversation in the direction you need it to go. All right, let's move on to more discovery questions. So now you're going to ask another challenging question. You're going to ask your customer to start thinking about what would happen If they decided they couldn't find anything they could afford, or they decided to keep putting it off, or maybe they just decided this wasn't for them and they didn't do anything at all, right? What happens then? And a lot of times they might tell you right then and there, well, my kids would have to pay for it and they'd have to come together and the family would have to do a car wash or a bake sale. Or they might simply just say, I don't really know what would happen. And whatever answer they give you, you just simply respond by saying, but is that what you want? Right? Do you want your kids to have to come together and fundraise and pay for this out of pocket when they're already emotionally grieving your loss? No, I don't. Okay. So if there was a way that we could get you exactly what you're looking for at an affordable cost, would that help you out at all? They're always going to say yes. And then you can say, now, in which ways do you think that would help you the most? And a lot of them are going to say, well, I won't have to think about this anymore, or it'll give me the peace of mind I'm looking for. Okay. Now you're going to do the most important part of discovery, which is your summary. You're hopefully paying very close attention to all the information your customer just gave you. And hopefully you didn't just go from question to question to question to question. You listened to your customer's answers and you thought to yourself, do I know enough about the answer they just gave me, or do I need to ask them to clarify? Do I have to ask additional questions so that I can better understand? And oftentimes you should be having a couple of 1-minute conversation between your questions to kind of wrap it all up, almost like mini active listening response summaries. So what I'm hearing is ... What you're telling me is what it sounds like, and kind of repeat back what they said in a different way. And then you want to label that with a feeling. So what I'm hearing is you don't have any insurance now. You've never had it before. So gosh, that must feel kind of overwhelming for you, having to go through this process, right? Or if they do have insurance and they're looking to add more, but it's been 20 years. So what I'm hearing is you have this really great $10,000 policy. You're hoping to get more, but what I'm hearing is that you weren't expecting it to be so much more expensive than what it was 20 years ago. So that must feel a little bit defeating for you. Is that right? Yes. Okay. So anytime you get answers to a situation, you want to make sure your customer knows that you heard them, and you want to label that with a feeling. I've even suggested to my agents, get a piece of paper and Google feelings, Google emotion words, and write them down like a word bank. So you have something to go off of if you don't know how to come up with them on your own. So we're at the end of discovery. All right, Mr. Prospect, let me just make sure I understand. And I'm going to give you an example of a really good end of summary discussion that maybe I would use. And then, of course, every customer situation is going to be different. So you're going to have to insert and plug and play where it's appropriate. Okay, Mr. Customer, let me see if I understand. So you don't have any insurance in place right now, as well as any sort of safety net like a savings. And you've also never had it before. So you're just kind of starting the process now, which might feel a little overwhelming. You've been looking, though, for about 3 to 6 months and haven't found anything because everything kind of seems kind of too expensive, more than you can afford. And to be honest, that might not make you feel very good either. Really, though, ultimately, you're just hoping to get a policy that pays for the funeral costs, the final expenses of a cremation, and possibly a celebration of life. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. You're just looking for some peace of mind so that your daughter and your son do not have to come out of their own pocket and pay for these expenses when you pass away. And that would give you that peace of mind that you're looking for. Does it sound like I got all that right? Okay. They're going to say yes. Is there anything else you're concerned about? I always ask, is there anything else? No, you got it. And then you can transition to the second part of your presentation, which will be an education, and that will be in part 2. So I hope you enjoyed the discovery breakdown. This is the single most critical part of your conversation. It sets the tone. I can tell you 100% of the time that I do not leave discovery until I know exactly what motivates them, what the need is, that they have a need to begin with, that we're on the same page, and I know exactly where I'm going to go the rest of the conversation on how to motivate my customer to make a decision to say yes. If you liked part 1, give me a like, give me a comment, and I can't wait to see you back in part 2, which is education.